Hello everybody. In today's rapidly evolving ecosystem, organizations face all kinds of risks. For example, technology-led risks like data breaches and ransomware attacks, to the ever-present threat of cyber fraud, or even emerging concerns like the potential for AI algorithms to exhibit bias, leading to discrimination, which adds another layer of complexity to the risk landscape. And then there are people-related risks, climate risks, and geopolitical risks which impact each one of us. And in such situations, the ability to communicate effectively about this risk, the potential solution, and the far-reaching impact with public and stakeholders is paramount. While this reactive part is important, it is increasingly becoming important to also look at risk from a preventive standpoint. And that is where I feel there is a profound role of storytelling, an age-old art form. And this can be a powerful tool to convey intricate, complex information. To discuss this, joining me is Ameen Haque, who, as some of you may know, is a seasoned storyteller, and Sivarama Krishnan, partner and leader for risk consulting in PwC India. Thanks, Ameen, for joining me today.
I am delighted to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
Thanks, Shiva.
Thanks, Nandini. Looking forward.
Okay, with that, let's get started. So, Ameen, you teach people the art of storytelling. But tell me, where there is technical content or very geeky content, let's say a CISO has to put out something, do you see a scope for storytelling in something like this as well?
Absolutely, and even more so. The more technical, the more need to simplify. And you would agree with me that a physics teacher, if is really, a very good physics teacher, would be able to simplify. Somebody who's an expert in cyber security comes and explains their life's work in a way that can be accessed by kids. And one of the things that that everybody follows at TED and that I follow in my teaching practices is, how would you explain this to a grandmother, and how would you explain this to a 6-year-old or 7-year-old? And that allows these experts to simplify their subject matter, their knowledge. I think one of the best examples was Einstein, who operated in really complex areas, but he was such a master and his knowledge was unparalleled that he could simplify everything. Take that simple example, and I'm paraphrasing and changing what he said about relativity. He had used a specific example of somebody on a hot tin plate, but if I could paraphrase from there, if you're in a performance appraisal conversation with a Khadu's boss and it's not going well, even 5 minutes of that conversation can seem like a lifetime. And if you've just fallen in love with someone, an hour with that person can seem like just 2 minutes. Now, to bring this kind of simplicity to explain the idea of relativity, it's only if you understand the topic well, can you simplify. And that's required in risk as well.
I've also heard this many times, that those who know the subject, understand it, can actually put it out in very simple words. But where you yourself are not so clear, then you kind of tend to use difficult language. But Shiva, risk practice, I mean, do you think there is a scope for storytelling in something like this?
No, absolutely. If I really think about it, we are the society of storytellers. All the epics, Panchatantra stories, and we have made most complex, abstract topics to be communicated to our child in a very simplest form. For that kid, it would be most complex, technical topic. But somehow or other, we are losing the touch when it comes to businesses. And today, especially in the current world, executives don't have a time to read 200, 300 pages of documentation and connecting the dots to come to the specific point. So, the storytelling could become very effective. I mean, early days of my career, I've done with one of the client. We try to attempt to tell a client what are the security flaws and what impact it could have in his environment. I mean, we were not that effective. So, we changed the tone. We just went ahead and hacked into the system, got a check printed, taken it back to the management to show it. That has a huge effect. That's the storytelling. because especially when you are in a technical topic, when you want to communicate to someone, you are not communicating to the subject matter experts on the other side. You are communicating to those who are related, but not directly connected. So, they may not have the depth to really catch that, but the effect of events or incidences or gaps could be told as a story, and that is what the storytelling is about, is all about, not about the process, but the effects and the outcomes one achieves it. So, absolutely every technical aspects has a space to tell a story. I mean, I recently see the one which I see is a Apple's advertisement on privacy. I mean, superb, excellent storytelling in one image communicates the entire message. I mean, there is a way, multitude of ways. I attended Ameen's session few weeks back in one of the B school. I found it amazing. I thought, oh, this is a great one to apply to us. So, I do see there is a great opportunity for us to change the way we communicate to our executives using storytelling as a means to be effective in our own services.
No, I think that's a very interesting example of hacking into somebody's system and then showing what can happen. But
I'm not proposing that, and I just wanted to be very careful on what I
was
said.
just coming to that, that is really carrying storytelling to a different level. But why do you think companies are finding it difficult? I mean, we all understand the power of storytelling, but why is it difficult to embed it?
Multitude of things, because when I come to you and say that please put your PIN on the phone, okay, which is secure. Now, the PIN and secure you understand, but I do not tell you why should you be doing it, and you are not as technically understood as I am. It is like going to a kid and tell them do not put your finger in front of fire. That is good for him or her, that kid, but they do not understand it. Whereas, if I had gone, or we all go to our kids and say that, you know what, you will get hurt, it will pain you, do not do it. Then it changes the tone and the attraction. Same thing when it comes to us as well in a functional areas. When it comes to functional areas, each one of us tuned to look for what is relevant to me in the clutter of millions and trillions of data of irrelevant messages that comes to me. That relevance, unless I have a touch, the communication is not going to be effective to me. So, how do I do that relevance on the area the other person specializes, not on the area which I specialize on? So, that becomes a storytelling. So, then what is the common ground? Common ground for you and for me is the outcome, not the technical content in itself. Then when it has to be outcome, then I need to convert into a story. That is the only way one could communicate the outcome. That is why it becomes very relevant even in a business context. And we all do not have enough time. I mean, at the end of the day, today I can tell you based on my experience, today no executive reads 100-page report. Everybody wants to have quick snapshot, and that snapshot too, they want to know impact of not doing it so that they can get it done. So, if you want to tell an impact of not doing it to get it done, the only way that you can do is to tell a story.
Yeah, and to add to that, I mean, I would imagine the base or the core is empathy. If you are able to put something out where the person is able to relate to it, which is the story. But then, are you also hearing, I mean, the fact that you are there and you are teaching people storytelling, it means people are finding it difficult to embed. Why?
Let's take, we come from our own biases, we come from, deeply embedded methods and practices in how we communicate. Let me give you a simple example, something that I picked up from Shiva, during our discussions. If I tell you, on your mobile phone, the data channel and the voice channel are different, and therefore you should be aware of it. What would you do differently? You would struggle to process this information. So a lot of technical information is conveyed like this. The same story, the voice channel and the data channel are different. If I say this, most people don't know what to do with that information. If I say, anybody can eavesdrop. Now let me convert that into a story. Imagine somebody, the head of RBI is conducting a Teams call and Anne is talking to the government about demonetization or about something else, as important as that, but it's happening on a Teams call, everybody's logged in, some people have logged in through a phone. And that information leaks out. Now you will never forget that story. So at every stage, what am I doing? The first stage is technical conversation. Voice channel, data channel separate and distinct from, unless you upgrade your phone. Second level, I am explaining through consequences. Anybody can eavesdrop. Third level, I am telling you a story and bringing in the criticality of our conversations and saying, here's what can happen. And the third one gets people to understand this, gets people to act on it. And that's what people want to learn. Why it's not embedded? Because we've got a whole history of technical communication as technical communication.
Yeah, true. I think when we write copywriting also, that's the basic thing. We say focus on the features, focus on the benefits, not the features. So in your case, you're saying focus on the outcome, focus on the impact, and not just talk about what you're getting out of it.
Yeah, what are the consequences of doing something? More importantly, a lot of communication, we end with call to action, that this is why we should do this. Sometimes I find in risk communication, what is more persuasive is, what are the consequences of not doing something? That's important to explain, but we don't think of communication like that, because we've steeped, in our traditions of call to action by saying this is what you'll get out of it.
Yeah. So if we talk of risk management for a moment, and consequences, talking about it is important, what would be the other elements you think are important for people to keep in mind when crafting stories?
The cost of not doing something can be communicated at multiple levels. What is the transactional cost, which is the monetary cost? What is the reputation cost? There's reputational loss. What is the personal cost? All data is personal, about employees, about vendors, there's a personal cost to that. And usually we look at the first one, the second one. Nobody talks about the third one, which is where humans are involved. And we don't even factor in the cost of that. Those are the narratives that we should be talking about.
So when one is putting out, let's say, planning a story, would there be some advice you give in terms of a process one should follow, or how should one start thinking of putting out a story?
Yeah. So the classic story structure starts with characters. So you start with a human element in a story, not just an organizational element, not technical information. The second element is to find the consequence and the cost of not doing something. The third is to bring that alive in the simplest possible manner. Let me give you a simple example. If I say there were 750,000 victims of skimming attacks last year, it has some impact on you. If I was to say, Mrs. Patel, a 78-year-old retired school teacher, a widow, went to the ATM to withdraw her pension. And while she was withdrawing that, while she was using her debit card, her card got cloned by someone who had put a magnetic strip and captured the password. She's lost all her life savings. She's lost trust on the banking system. She's lost sleep. She's lost dignity. She had to borrow money from a neighbor. And she has had a heart attack. It's not Mrs. Patel alone. There are 750,000 such victims of skimming attacks in India. What's more powerful? The single person narrative or just the data and facts?
Very true. I mean, this is something, Shiva, you would be seeing in your practice all the time as examples. Then how come storytelling is still taking time to get embedded?
I think there are a multitude of challenges. One challenge which I feel is that core to all of this is that we have not thought through who are we communicating to and what are we communicating. I mean, what is the storytelling's fundamental line is what you tell can be understood by everybody who reads, and everyone extracts what is relevant to them. So everybody looks at the story with their own prism. So it means I need to build things that I communicate which goes back to every part of actors. Unfortunately, in our technical education and work, we are all tuned towards probably homogeneous work environment. So, in this era I need to really change, and there is interconnectedness also has gone up, and fundamental change which I see is that most of the management role has moved away by being just doing a functional activity which are all taken over by technologies into interconnected coordination activities. Today the supply chain head needs to work more with the manufacturing and the marketing team, not with the data and processing orders, etc., all taken away. So, there is a lot more human touch, human connectedness is going up instead of just work activities, but we are not prepared yet for it. I think that is where the storytelling can come as a very handy effective means of passing on a message, but every stakeholder in the meeting understands it. They may pick up their own context, but everyone understands it.
Let's take this example that we spoke of, card skimming. Most people who are watching this may not understand the term skimming. For Mrs. Patel, skimming was a term that she was familiar with in the context of milk.
I was just thinking
that
that.
they skimmed
exactly.
milk. Most people don't understand what is skimming. Now, skimming is a way of cloning the card's data and capturing the password so that you can create a duplicate card. Now, a lot of people speak in technical terms like this, skimming, and don't explain it as to what it means. And that's the problem, that the assumption in communication is that I have said and you have understood, but that's not the case. And there is often a big gap between what I have said and what you have understood.
In fact, in many cases for a technical gigs, throwing words is demonstrating the technical provenness without understanding whether other person understands or not.
Absolutely.
So that also gets added to that, because attitude also makes a huge difference in this case, in these cases.
But the important thing is finding the right hook for each person in the target audience. But that hook is what probably needs to be looked at.
Yeah. In fact, Nandini, since you are talking about it, if I go to walk into a meeting, I do know my actors. If I go and submit a report, I know who is going to be the readers. But do I read this in their angle, or am I reading it in my, my world in many cases? Most of the time, we read from our world. And how well am I writing it to make sure that I am correct, right, technically? But our correctness or rightness doesn't come based on what I wrote and what I perceive, but come from what the reader understands and reads and perceives and understood.
Yeah.
So it is like showing an elephant to a blind man.
And there are 4 blind men, not one, and each one of them is holding a different part. So if the communicator thinks about that, then you will be able to contextualize it for them.
At the end of the day, what matters is, did it get absorbed? How do you measure that? I mean, is there a KPI for something like that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Now, I further break it down and go further and say, well, there is compliance by fear, that CCTV camera is there, it's watching, and that's why. Or is there compliance by culture? And culture is when there is no CCTV camera, but still there is compliance. You can build KPIs on all of this. True compliance is where there is no CCTV camera and still you are doing what is right. There are ways of measuring that.
And what would you suggest companies should be investing in so that this can actually be measured? Firstly, it can be done and then it can be measured.
I think that I see the 3 levels. First level is, are we making this interfunctional people to communicate with the other person in their world? So I think this is an essential requirement, like a communication skills. Storytelling is going to be an essential component of it. That's the first. Most of the time in the meeting rooms, we break the communication breaks. Why? Because of not connecting with each other. Storytelling could be a good means of connecting with each other. Okay, then that becomes a basis for us to drive that. So that's a second measure. I mean, I'm just going one level below for us to measure. It could be reduction in acrimony. Finally comes into it, the compliance piece outcome measure that one tries to achieve. Every corporate failure that you've seen, each one of them, you could find lot of early warning signals. Lot of them are ignored. It is not ignored with an intent. it is ignored because it is not connected by the other person of that signals that reaches them. So, how do you connect it, convert that into a story?
What should a company be investing in to teach or get people into storytelling other than getting an Ameen Haque to come and teach? What else?
I think a couple of measures, early warning systems are in place, listening. In a world cluttered with too much information, are we listening? Second, explaining something not at the technical level but at the consequence level, and that consequence level is at the human level. Third, simplifying it by using analogies or metaphors.
We can do lot more effective communication. We have invested in it, whether it is in our trainings or in our learnings in academia, etc., academic courses. We learnt good amount of communication, but we have not learned telling a story for a heterogeneous audience. Today the need is to address heterogeneous audience lot more than what it was in the past. That is where it makes it very, very important.
And the role of technology for something like this, because this is humanizing content, but what about technology?
Let's look at it, human evolution. The first wave of human evolution, finding a cart, a wheel, then comes in navigation, then came in aviation, and that has become a third wave of expansion. Fourth has come in the technology. So, everybody else had a one-to-one communication in many form or organization to organization, but today it is not. It is one to many and many to many. In that case, I do not know each individual, but then I need to have perception about what would be their stake and interest. How do I write a story that attracts them? So, there is a filtration, there is an art of making sure that even in the homogeneous crowd they understand there needs to be I need to tell a story that attracts each one of them. Here also it happened the same. In a technical world it becomes all the more important, because the number of people who understand technology is very, very small. A number of people who uses technology is very large, and that is why you have lots and lots of problems. If you go into any public forum, social media cribbings, 90-95% is about technology.
I would add to that slightly differently. I would say every business has become a tech business.
Yeah. But coming to another question on technology, are there any emerging technologies that you feel are going to be influencing the art of storytelling?
I think more than technology, what is influencing storytelling is the information explosion and the data explosion. So, the explosion of data has led to a new field of storytelling, data storytelling. So, take newer storytelling platforms. When Twitter came in, it had 140 characters. Now you have to be able to tell a story in 140 characters. I think that's a great exercise for your story muscles to say, how do I tell it in brevity, saying more in less. So yes, so with each advance like this, there are some implications on storytelling, and they're all good.
Okay, let's move on to the next phase. So Shiva, Ameen, I'll be speaking a word, and we need your brief response to that, a quick response on some of them as a rapid fire. 2 essential skills you feel are needed for good storytelling.
Listening and the ability to speak metaphorically to simplify something.
Shiva?
Yeah, understanding the issue, and number 2 connecting the dots with the multiple stakeholders.
And 2 people in your opinion who are good storytellers?
In the context of business, I would say Steve Jobs, one of the finest. In a larger sense, there are many of them. I would say Devdutt Pattanayak in mythology.
Another one in business?
Business storyteller, there's one who I admire, Indian, love his work, Prakash Iyer.
Okay, I have to say.
Author of many books.
Okay.
Of course, I concur to Steve Jobs, but my personal belief is that I think Sri Krishna is the biggest storyteller. If I really think about it, every time when you read Bhagavad Gita, it can mean to anybody, to anything, in any form that you can decipher.
Very true. And who's your favorite author? Somebody who really tells story well?
Well, quite a few of them. I would say Malcolm Gladwell, one of them. Prakash Iyer, I love his books. There are quite a few. It's a long list. I love reading Tim Ferriss. couple of books, Tools of Titans. But Malcolm Gladwell is someone I keep returning to, his ability to take complex science ideas and then weave narrative, particularly in the context of the conversation that we're having.
You know, for me, I mean, from my school, college days, Ayn Rand, the fountainhead and the objectivity analysis, that's something which has gone into deep into my head. That's also part of the storytelling, because a very complex subject so nicely got articulated. All our books, I used to love it. From you know, since I'm very interested in these days on the Indian philosophy, I believe Swami Vivekananda.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the greatest amount of communication, the ability to tell a story, choice of words, I have not come across anybody in parallel to Swami Vivekananda's speeches of abstract philosophy into a common man's language.
Any ethical pitfall one should be careful of when one is doing storytelling?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. You know, when people come late and somebody starts explaining why they came late, we all get into this notion that, oh, he's going to tell a story. That's not a story. If it's a lie, it's a lie, and there's a difference between the two. If it's an excuse, and that's not a story. Story is, you know, I follow a simple definition. Story is truth well told. And there are two aspects to that. First is truth, and then comes well told. There's a lot that's happening on WhatsApp that's well told, but it's not based on the truth. So story is the elevation of the truth, but not the exaggeration of it.
Yeah, that's really solid. Very true. Shiva?
I think we need to avoid the biases, because most of the time when we read a story, we read with our own biases. If you are able to minimize it, then it makes it effective. Even when you tell a story, you also use your biases. So the only pitfall which we need to avoid is to keep our biases away. He used the word truth. Truth has got a deep meaning, but if I want to put as a fact, then it makes it easier rather than, you know, applying our biases to color it.
Difficult, very difficult, but probably that's what needs practice.
That's a practice that is needed.
How do you unwind, Shiva?
Yeah, these days is Vedas and Upanishads and Gita.
I was trying to get the story behind the person, you know. So now we know who the person is. What about you, Ameen?
Music, a lot of listening to music, sometimes playing. Yeah, and I'm lucky to be surrounded by, in my family and in my friend circle, people who play music or sing well. So truly blessed there.
But none of you is reading a book.
Book is a constant companion, and stories are a constant companion. I research stories, I write stories. The other thing that I find very relaxing for me, and it's connected to music, is poetry. So I can also consume music in a different language where I don't understand, but the most beautiful experiences are when the poetry and the music come together and it elevates it to the next level, or poetry which has not been set to music, but some of the greatest poets, including you know, devotional poetry, Kabir, for example, or Mirabai.
Interesting. I think with that we come to the end. Thank you very much, Ameen, for joining me today, and thanks, Shiva.
Thank you.
We have always known the intrinsic power of storytelling to capture and engage audiences. And today, we looked at it in the context of risk management, where it can be an essential instrument in the risk toolkit. Well-crafted narratives can humanize data and complex situations. They can facilitate meaningful engagement with all stakeholders for navigating the intricate web of risk. They can inspire action and ultimately foster trust among those we communicate with. And these perspectives are equally relevant for other technical content as well, frankly, especially in B2B organizations where one encounters many such situations. I hope this discussion will give you some food for thought on how storytelling can better your communication and fortify the organization's resilience in an increasingly uncertain world. Thank you.